Welcome to Native Roots Radio presents Rising from COVID-19, Another Story of Resilience. This is a series of 3 shows we're going to be doing, and my co-host here is Dr. Stately of Native American Community Development, Native American Community Clinic here in Minneapolis in the Twin Cities. And we have a long story to tell here, and what we want to really do is set up the other shows today and tonight for the next 2 shows. But I think it's really important for us to know who we are and what we're trying to accomplish here. And I want to really bring in Dr. Stately right now and talk about a few things. And one of the things I'd really love for you to bring up to the audience is who you are, and not only who you are, but what you about your community and about where you work. And you have a compelling story to tell our listening audience.
Oh, well, excuse me. Well, thank you first, Miigwech, for inviting me to be a co-host and to be here with you this evening. And bonjour to everybody out there in Indian country listening tonight. My name is Anthony Staley. I'm the executive officer and president of the Native American Community Clinic in South Minneapolis. And that's my professional title. I think probably my most important role in life really is being the dad of twin boys who are one is a 2-time state champion in hockey, and the other one only got to go once, and that's a whole thing. So we could take all 3 series to talk about that.
Right.
and that happened during COVID, so that was a compelling and interesting experience. But I'm an enrolled citizen of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, and I'm a descendant of the Great Red Lake and White Earth Nations of Minnesota. And my mother was from White Earth and my father was from Red Lake. And I was born and raised in South Minneapolis, and I lived in this area for my entire life, except for the years that I was in boarding school. And I went to boarding school from the ages of 6, maybe 5.5, because I started, I think, when I was going into 1st grade, and was there until about 11 years old. And, like a lot of Native families, my parents kind of moved around a lot. So we spent a lot of time in the Twin Cities. Most of my memories are of times living in the Twin Cities. We also moved back and forth between Milwaukee and Minnesota often, and we also moved between White Earth and Minneapolis, and also Net Lake or Boys Fort when I was a small child with my sister's my younger sister's father. Mm-hmm. So I've kind of been all over the map, I think, in the Midwest. And I moved away for about 20 years and then came back when my children were born. My sons are Dakota, and I adopted them at birth. The day they came out is the day that I got them. And nothing really changes and completely reorientates your perspective on life until you become a parent, I think. It really does change everything about the way that you see the world. And when they were little tiny guys and they would sleep next to me. Well, actually, they're twins, so they wanted me to always sleep between them. So I'd always get sandwiched, until when they fell asleep, then I have to wiggle my way out. But when they were little tiny guys, I would whisper in their ears, and I would say, thank you for saving my life, because that's what it felt like. It felt like when they were born, I was given a much deeper sense of understanding about my role and my responsibility on the planet, and they helped to really clarify, like, what I was going to do with my life, right? And when they were 2 years old, they moved back to Minnesota to raise them around their relatives, and to be on their homeland, and so that they would be around their language. They would hear Dakota language. They would hear and see Dakota songs and music and culture, and I wanted them to know who they were, and I wanted them to know that this is the place they're from. So that was a really important part of my life. And it also created for me an opportunity to step into the work that I do today, and that was also completely unexpected, and in a lot of ways life-changing as well. So the last several years have been life-changing because of the work I do.
Yeah, and let's get a little deeper in the work you're doing right now, because that's it's amazing, and I think all around when we talk to state agencies here in my show, Native Roots Radio, we hear about Native American Community Clinic and the great work you're doing, and I already know that, but it's really kind of a blessing to hear other outside organizations talk so highly of what you do, and let's talk a little bit about what your clinic does.
Sure. Well, thank you for mentioning that and acknowledging the work we do. That's really, I appreciate it. So I have the honor and privilege, it's a tremendous honor actually, to be in the role that I'm in, the executive officer and president of Native American Community Clinic. I think it's a unique experience to go off and kind of mature and become a man, and then come back to your community that raised you and gave you your grounded you and gave you a strong foundation to build your life on. And so it's been a really great honor to come back and work for them. And I am so just a little bit of background. I am a doctor. I'm a clinical psychologist. My sons always like to say, like, oh, he's not that kind of doctor because he can't actually help you. So, they got that great Indian humor, those two. Yeah. And they're really great at, keeping you humble. And so my background has been in clinical psychologist, and my training was in multicultural clinical community psychology, and I focused a lot of my early training and my work in understanding the impact of historical trauma and intergenerational transmission of trauma in our families and in our community. And I focused all my research and my clinical work in that area for a good decade before I came back to Minnesota. And that training was fundamental and foundational for me in understanding the things that we're seeing happening in our communities, and helping me to understand how to address that and manage that as a clinician, like in therapy, which is where I was doing a lot of my work for most of the early part of my career. But then, I fairly rapidly, and I think this happens in a lot of, for a lot of people who get their advanced degrees in in our community, whether that's in education or psychology or medicine or law, any of these kinds of things where we have significant great need in our communities. We just have tremendous need, right? That if you happen to be fairly good at the thing that you're doing, your community sort of like, lifts you up and kind of pulls you into leadership and sort of says, sometimes indirectly, but sometimes directly, it's time for you to step forward and do something and help us here. And that happened to me early on in my career in Los Angeles. When I was in grad school, I worked as a volunteer for this small little tiny IHS-funded clinic in downtown Los Angeles on Skid Row. I used to have to walk over people, sleeping on the steps or in the alley, because it was right next to the alley. It was really, I forget, they used to call it Indian Alley, actually.
Wow.
And one of the profound things that I learned in that experience of being a volunteer, running groups for people, and just doing whatever they really needed me to do in my training was I would hear stories from the people, the men and the women who would come into my group about how long they had been homeless. And they would tell me stories of that I would ask them things like, like kind of what we do in Indian country. We're like, hey, tell me who you are and where you're from, right? And they'd always, and 9 times out of 10, the people I was talking to in that situation, they were from someplace other than Los Angeles. They were from someplace far away, Chicago, Wisconsin, Kansas, the upper Midwest, or the Northwestern coast. They were always from someplace other than the place we were at. And they would have stories of things like that, their parents or their grandparents had been houseless as well there, homeless as well there. Like they had stories of growing up in cars, sleeping on the streets. And that was a really difficult thing to listen to, but I also didn't put a lot of things together at that point in time in my sort of my early career. I didn't understand the direct connection of that experience and the things I was hearing to policy, federal Indian policy, right? Here I'm speaking to people in Los Angeles, which was a relocation city during the federal Indian policy of Relocation Act. And I'm talking to people who have been generationally impacted by that, by the failure of that policy, right? And here I am. What I realize now, looking backwards, is it's laying this foundation for me to understand some of the things I'm struggling with now in the leadership role that I have. But back then, I was a volunteer and I was in grad school, and a year and a half, I think, about a year and a half, almost 2 years out of grad school. I graduated in 1997. In 1999, this organization asked me to step in and help them to develop a mental health services clinic for children, for families.
Wow.
I had no idea how I was going to do that. I had worked in other clinics in my training. And, and it's kind of, but I think this is the other part of some of this conversation we're going to have later, which is so many of us in leadership roles, nobody in my graduate training taught me how to be a CEO. Nobody taught me how to be a president. There isn't a school that you can go to learn those skills, right?
Right.
And so what I realize now is that my community sort of said, you have something that's going to help us. You have an education. You understand this thing that we don't. And yeah, maybe you're not an expert in it, but we need your help. And so they're like, will you do this? And you have people asking you will you do this? And you're like, if you have any sense of commitment to not just the work you're doing, but the commitment to help the people. You just step forward, and I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I literally actually didn't know what I was going to do. I mean, I had worked in child mental health clinics, but so I understood like how the billing process worked. I kind of did it enough to understand generally like how things operated and how the finance part of it worked. And I just was like, jumped in because I knew that the scale of the need. I had been in working for them when they were a smaller operation and right in Skid Row in downtown LA, and I think there is something about that experience early on that was coded in my sort of genetic memory and my own experience of watching the things that were going around me phenomenologically when I was a kid. So I was raised in South Minneapolis in the late 60s, early 70s, during the time of the Civil Rights Movement and the American Indian Movement. I have deep memories of my mother organizing these meetings and other Native women organizing meetings in our community in response to police violence.
Right.
Directed at the men and other members of our community, right? And I was just a young boy at the time. I didn't understand what was going on, but I have memories of them filing through my house, going on down into the basement. We lived in the Southeast Projects, kind of over by the university at the time, and my mom would stand at the top of the stairs and they'd all go downstairs. I remember my uncles, Dennis Banks, the Belcourt brothers, and a bunch of other folks, not just them, and then all the women that were involved. And they would go down into the basement, and my mom would stop me at the top of the steps, and she'd close the door. She goes, "Don't come down here. We're going to have adult conversation." And, but I was also that kid that would do things like crazy things like lay on the floor and try to look underneath the crack of the floor and listen in. And so I was just, I was that pain in the ass kid. Oh, sorry. I have to bleep that probably. Pain in the butt kid who just sort of did everything that their parents didn't tell them to do because I had a curiosity and a thirst for life and trying to understand what was going on around me. So there you can see the foundation being built for trying to understand what's going on in my community, trying to understand the world around me and what was going on, and the curiosity of wanting to understand problems and wanting to understand solutions. And I had great role models for leadership. I didn't realize this at the time, but every single one of those people walking into my home and filing past me, and I would see out in the community, they were demonstrating for me how to be a leader, and I didn't know it at the time, and what they taught me was that when there is a crisis in our community, and we have a gift. Actually, one of the things I learned in this process is that every single one of us has the capacity for leadership. Every single person in our community has the capacity for leadership. We are a strong, resilient people who've endured so many things, so many injustices, and so many things over the decades and generations of our lives. So we have that built into us, the capacity to do that. But I happened to find, not really early in my life. I was in my 30s, 35 or so when I graduated from graduate school. But I found this thing that I found a skill, and I found something that I was good at, and other people recognized that in me and encouraged, and also sometimes told me, you have this thing, we need you, right? And so it laid this foundation for me and connected me to that sort of ancestral and that sort of the way I grew up and the way I saw other people showing up and stepping in when there was a crisis. And so that's just kind of, I think, how I've operated. And I think it's embedded even in the way I sort of work, the cadence at which I work, and it comes through in the way I lead, and even in the organization I'm in today. I I have an amazing workforce, an amazing team. They're just amazingly beautiful people who lead with heart, and it's not to say that they don't get things wrong sometimes. Sometimes they get things wrong. We all do. None of us are perfect. But they have the most beautiful hearts, and they work hard, and they give 110% of themselves to the things that we are struggling with. And it has been a rough 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
A rough 3 or 4 years. And it's been a tremendous privilege for me to bring this skill set that I have to this work. And I've learned a lot from that experience as well.
That's beautiful, and I've learned a few things that I didn't know about you. And what I want to do right now too is just kind of jump into the history of COVID. And when I think about that, I really have to think, because I got a good memory, but it's short. And what happens is we forget about things that we've heard from people taking their clothes off at the door and not knowing if the clothes spreads COVID. But I remember, for me, in the very, very beginning, there were people that were stuck on ships that couldn't get off, and it was like they were closing the borders but leaving European planes to come in, and it just baffles my mind to think back that short time. What is your my
recollection?
That too.
Yeah.
Of I was going to say recollection, but that's another show.
It is.
But what are your thoughts and memories of? And that's a definition of when the history of COVID and how it started with us.
Oh God, I was thinking about this because I knew we were going to be here having this conversation, and I was trying to remember like what it was like before COVID. I think a lot of people are going to have that thing, like, my sons say this too. They're like, like they divide the world in like, as kids do. I think that's kind of a way that you sort of kind of figure out big chunks of time in your life and what were the big things that sort of defined your life. And for them, it's like there was this world before COVID, and now there's this world after COVID. So they call it AC.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that.
BC and AC. And so, yeah, I sometimes forget what it was like right before. And I remember, I think it was like, I don't know, I think it was like November-ish, December-ish of 2019. NAC was in the process of, so in my professional life, we were in this process of working to try to purchase the building that we had been operating for the last 18 years or so. And we had these big, glorious ideas of what we were going to do with that and a few other things. We had just come out of the Wall of Forgotten Natives.
Oh, wow.
Remember? And so we had that experience where my clinic had like responded to like the largest encampment that Minnesota had ever seen in its entire history, right? Of houseless natives, since like maybe the Dakota War.
Right.
Yeah.
Across from Fort Snelling.
Yeah. And so I think like we had just come out of that crisis, and the year prior to that, we had a little bit of an internal crisis. My first year at NAC, we were going through some challenges, as all organizations do, and there's a significant change in leadership, I think. But we had gotten through that, faced with that challenge of the Wall of Forgotten Natives. We stepped forward. That was the year 2018. 2019 was the year we started building out our cultural healing services just in time for us to have this condition where we delivered spiritual care and traditional healing services to encampment people. We delivered a bunch of other things to them. And I felt like this moment where, we had gotten through that really tough fall of 2018, went into 2019, got people through that big crisis, got people housed, a significant number of them housed. Actually, the ones that didn't get housed were in a navigation center, which is basically a big, huge shelter structure where we delivered services on site on Franklin Avenue, right on the cultural corridor. And then we got through that, and we kind of had this moment, I have this really profound memory of like where I thought, like, for a good 9 months solid, I just sort of felt like in my role of like I was just holding my breath. And then the summer of 2019, I felt like I was able to sort of like, just like, right. So then that was that, and then the fall came, and then we started hearing about this, this virus in China that was, and I remember thinking, I had this moment where I was thinking, well, other things have started there too, and they contained them, like, and then I remember.
I think of like mad cow disease. You remember that was a big thing, and that never shriveled out to anything. So I wasn't too concerned either.
Yeah. Do you remember when people were really anxious and afraid, like, oh, if I eat beef, I'm gonna like go crazy and start banging my head against the wall?
Yeah.
I went like a whole 4 months, I think, maybe, where I didn't eat hamburger because I just didn't trust. Good time to go back to Buffalo.
I do. Exactly. Bison in my way, my culture. But that was a thing, definitely. And the media helped drive it, and I thought that was happening again.
Yeah, so I think that's a great sort of like segue into this whole idea of like, well, we had these other experiences. Like, remember, we also thought like avian flu was going to kill everybody. And like, there's just like there's this cadence to media. And I realize now we're on media. So like, I want to kind of acknowledge that as well. There's this cadence to media sometimes to sort of like just try its best to scare the hell out of American people. Or just people in general, right?
Right.
It's part of how it's embedded in our culture as specifically, I think, Western culture, to sort of like try to, motivate people to do things like, I don't know, buy this shirt, not that shirt, buy this car, not that car, brush your teeth, floss them. I'm not speaking to you directly, but
sure?
But that thing also creates this narrative and this thing in our head where we're like less likely to it's kind of like the boy who cried wolf syndrome. It's like, we're less likely to take the next sort of big, huge thing that you're talking about seriously. And I think that's kind of a little bit where a lot of people were at the beginning of the pandemic. And I remember having this thought in my head, like, they're going to contain it and it's going to stay over there. And then I remember having some early conversations with some colleagues and a few other people. And, we had other people be like, it's going to take over the world. We're going to turn into zombies. That's it. We're like, and there's nothing like that level of a crisis to sort of kind of create really, when we start to see people die at the scale at which they were dying, and they were dying fairly rapidly.
Yeah.
Right. I had this moment in the early part of that pandemic where I remembered, where I likened that the way that I was feeling and the way that the world felt around me as similar to the way that I felt being a young gay man I landed in Los Angeles in 1986, March of 86, at the height of the AIDS epidemic.
Exactly.
And I remember just like, I'd meet people, I'd know them for a few weeks, a couple months, maybe a year, and then they'd be gone from my life. And it was just like, and it was such, the scale of loss was similar to that. And it sort of like pulled on that experience for me. I had this moment where I was like,
wow,
and kind of walked through the world of like wondering like who was going to leave next, what was going to happen next. And I had, because I was a father now too, I had like just tremendously deep fear of the impact that it was going to have on my kids and my family, my extended family. Right? because I had built this world and this life around them and around my work, but also mostly around my family and my community. And, you know, I came back home because I needed help raising my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, what is going to happen to me and to my ability to function if somebody really close to me leaves?
Right.
And and I had that moment where I was really afraid. And now at that point in time, I hadn't even thought about myself, really.
Right. And then we fast forward to once COVID was spread around Turtle Island with no vaccine. As it's hard
No
for me
vaccines.
to even remember that. It was such a huge thing, and we were doing.
We didn't have a way to test for it until well into 2020.
Wow.
Like, I think March or April of 2020, we had a way of testing for it.
So we had people getting sick. We had people getting hospitalized. And there was, it was reminiscent to me a lot of the Vietnam War with, I don't know if you remember this, Dr. Stately, but we used to have a count, how many Vietnamese were killed and how many Americans were killed, and almost like a scoreboard every night on the news that we were winning the war by killing maybe 300 more Vietnamese, and Americans were being killed. But the count reminded me eerily of that period in the time. And so we fast forward here in the next 4 minutes of this segment here, you were hospitalized.
I was, yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Oh, God. Yeah, I didn't expect that. So that was really, I hadn't planned, which is like so like, I had not had a plan in my head for like what would happen if I got sick. I think some of that was like, like everybody, I did the thing, like, came home from the clinic, I'd take my clothes off, like I'd wear the little booties, and I'd like drop all my clothes at the door, and I'd scarf them up and throw them in plastic bags, and then get them down to the washer right away. I'd do that kind of stuff. I did, I remember like I was sitting on the couch early, and somebody was like, you better go get some, get all the Lysol wipes you possibly can, because they're going to be gone soon, right? And you remember days of no toilet paper? Oh my God!
And paper towels, and the price has never gone down since.
No, it hasn't. Yeah, and many of those trees that made those paper towels, they died way before COVID. There's no reason for them to be that expensive.
Exactly.
But I think one of the things I just like remembered is like, I ran out to get like wipes at Target, and there was like nothing on the shelves, just like empty shelves. I felt like I had this memory in my head where I thought that I remember having was like, this must be what it felt like for people like during like the Holocaust, or right, like leading, like during World War II, when they'd walk into places and there's like no bread, and there's nothing of the staples in their lives that they rely on.
Right.
And I had a moment of panic, honestly. And then it was like, okay, well, if I can't get those wipes, I probably should go buy some bleach. So I ran over to the Dollar Tree, and God, I found like, I found like some, a good supply of bleach at the Dollar Tree. I got it for 96 cents.
Under $1.
Under $1. And you know what? I bought like 20 of them. Now, at the end of the pandemic, when a year later, I still had about 17 bottles in my garage, which I actually gave away later when I moved. But the point being, like 96 cents for a gallon of bleach. Now it's like $4 for a gallon of bleach.
That's right.
Prices have never gone down. But I think I had this moment, I think, where I thought I was impervious because I worked in healthcare, and somehow like being in that setting and having access to the knowledge and all the information was somehow going to keep me safe. And that wasn't my experience at all.
I think this might be a good time to pause, especially emotionally and spiritually, with go to the next segment. Why don't we all take a quick break here, and we'll just take deep breaths here and move on, because what we're going to talk about is pretty heavy, and we're going to bring our guest in soon too. And I just want to say Native Roots Radio is presenting Rising from COVID-19, another story of resilience, and I'm here with co-host Dr. Stately and producer Haley Cherry, and we'll be right back. Please stay with us and take a little short break here. Native Roots Radio presents Rising from COVID-19, another story of resilience.
Yes, and this special broadcast is supported by the Minnesota Department of Health.
Yes, it is. Hey, we're here with our co-host, Dr. Stately, and we're kind of talking about the history of Dr. Stately, but also the history of COVID. And you like that, didn't you? You're historic. And well, we're just getting into the weeds here a little bit, and kind of feeling a little emotional too about your journey. And I don't really know the exact steps, but right now we kind of left off where you saw this coming, and it was almost a dark cloud, and there was a lot of feelings going on. And one of them was that what would happen if COVID affected you personally and your family, and the other was that it ended up affecting you and your family. So why don't we start from there?
Yeah, I mean, like I think I mentioned, I hadn't really given it a lot of thought, as much intentional thought as I should have, like the what ifs. I hadn't. I think there was a part of me that thought I would be impervious to it, because I was like working in a healthcare setting. I had all this information in my head. I was doing the thing, bleaching every surface that I could get my hands on and think about, taking my clothes off, washing them. There was a point where I stopped going into the office because I wanted to sort of kind of mitigate the potential of bringing COVID home. So I did all the things, right? Mm-hmm. And you remember that the school started to close down. People were learning from home. My kids played 4 weeks of hockey in their first season, and they had to stop.
Wow.
And I remember being shuttered in place, right, and sheltered in place, and not going anywhere and staying home. And we lived in a much smaller house than we live in now, and we're just on top of each other, and my kids were like, please, can we go, hang out with some friends and, play football, right? And it was October-ish, around this time 4 years ago. And I was like, well, okay, but wear masks, and that kind of thing. And, they were 12 years old, so they didn't really, 12, 13 years old, not a lot of impulse control at that age. Some of us don't even have it much later in life. But they went and hung out with their friends and played football, and they tackling each other and doing the whole thing. And remember that weekend, and then about 4 days later, my son Chaske is not feeling well, and he's like, Dad, I don't feel well, I'm sick. And so I was like, well, it's me, we're doing everything right, we're okay. And then he didn't get better, and so then the other kid gets sick, and then well, actually, before he got sick, I took him to the hospital. I took him to the clinic, not my clinic, but I live really close to the Shakopee, Minnewaca, and Sioux community. And I used their primary care clinic for my family's care. And they tested him, and he came back positive. And I just remember, like, when we got the test result, and I told him he had COVID, and I just remember him, like, and they were like, go home. He has to isolate, or he has to quarantine, and the rest of you have to stay in your home. And if you go out to get meals or those things, wear masks. All the things that we had to do. Right.
And at this point, there was no vaccine and no way to tell. Well, it sounds like there was a way to tell you had COVID now.
Yeah. So we got the ability to start testing for COVID, like, I think the end of the first quarter of 2020, and this is like around November or October of 2020, right? And so we go home, and I have to put him in his room, and he, I was just talking to him about this the other day. He was like, "Oh yeah," he goes, "I was having a great time. I got to, I didn't have to go to school, and I didn't have to show up, and I watched Grease every single day, every day, over and over, and he remembered. So he didn't get super sick, but he got sick enough, but he didn't get super sick. And I remember just thinking to myself, we're gonna be okay. Like, I made dinner for us, and then I'd bring his dinner to him on a tray, and I'd put it in front of his door, and I'd knock on the door, and then he'd come out and get it and go back in, and he'd have to do the same thing, knock on the door, leave the tray.
Wow.
And that was like how we sort of did that cadence for, like, I would think probably, 4 days or so. And then he was getting better, I think, and not really, didn't seem to have a lot of positive symptoms. And there was a moment, like at the third, fourth day, when he was like, kind of like, he was clearly uncomfortable. He had a high fever, but he wasn't like having a lot of, and I didn't do the thing that they all said to do, which is like, stay out of the room. He was uncomfortable, and it was hard to watch as a parent. And I went in, and I laid down with him. Yeah, wow. And I held him one of those nights. I think because I was scared. So that's probably, like the way in which it sort of kind of spread throughout our home. We lived in a really small home at the time, like a little tiny townhouse, not an open concept. So there wasn't like place, really was like very little places to sort of like go and quarantine and like, and it's interesting because I think back now, it's like how many people must have had that sort of kind of experience. Right. Like, and there was this feeling I think that my son had of like guilt. I remember him saying to me over and over, "I'm so sorry, Daddy." And my own sense of guilt about like not doing a better job of protecting him, and and then so it spread fairly rapidly through our house. Wow. Like it just like he got sick, I got sick because I laid with him, and my other son got sick fairly quickly, and then their other father got sick. So all four of us are sick, all within like a week or two of each other, like within like clockwork.
Wow.
And so then I was like, for a good period of time, I felt fine, and I remember a defining moment when I lost my sense of taste. And I was like, I was sick already, and then I lost my sense of taste and smell, and I was like, and then I stopped eating because everything. It didn't matter what it was. Everything tasted just like I was chewing dried cardboard or wet cardboard, depending on the consistency of it, what it was. And so, and within 2 weeks of getting sick, I was having, challenges with my respiratory and I went out and got the thing, remember you had to take your your oxygen level,
That's
the
right.
oximeter. And do you remember it was so hard to get those? I remember just thinking I drove to 5 pharmacies to find one.
I do remember that. That's
And
crazy.
It was, and on the night I went to the hospital, I was, they were sick. I was sick. Conan, their other father, was sick, and we were doing our best to sort of take care of one another, and I woke up in the morning of the day I had to go to the hospital. It was the week of Thanksgiving. I had been working on purchasing a house. I was supposed to close on our house that week. And I went to get the oximeter, and I put the oximeter on, and it was 89. And I was like, oh. Right. So,
And what's the numbers?
Because they say, I had asked my medical officer at NAC, I would call her or text her, and she'd say, okay, if you fall below 90, you have to go to the hospital.
Whoa.
And I had a few days where it was really, it hovered around 92, 93-ish when I was sick, and it would dip down, but then it would come back up. And she said, it's always going to be a little bit lower in the morning when you first wake up. You'll probably be just fine. You'll probably bounce back. So, but just keep taking it. Mm-hmm. So I went through the entire day, and I took it, every hour, and it wasn't going back up.
Oh.
And then around 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, I'm making dinner, and I check it again, and it's now 87 instead of 89 or whatever. And I was like, I'm texting my sister by cell, and she's like, go to the hospital.
Right.
And I said, I will go to the hospital. I'm going to make dinner first for the boys.
Good Indian there.
Right? So, trying to do the thing, making the dinner, doing the dishes, cleaning up, kind of just making sure that they're taken care of. And, and I checked again, this hope, okay, it'll go back up. Because I didn't really feel, in the morning, I didn't feel really all that well. It was just this number on this thing that was telling me. But by the end of the day, I noticed things like walking the 6 steps up to the bathroom.
Jeez.
I was getting a little bit more labored in my breathing. And, I had all the evidence, and even then, I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave my kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
It terrified me to leave my children.
Yeah.
And so I waited to the last minute. My sister was like, if you don't go to the hospital right now, I'm gonna call an ambulance and send it over there. And I was like, oh my God, do not call an ambulance. I will die of embarrassment if not COVID.
Right.
I don't know what that was all about. That's just ridiculous. But so I was like, I'm going to drive myself. She was like, you cannot drive yourself to the hospital.
Is this the doctor is the worst patient kind of
yes,
thing that's happening now?
It is completely, because it's and it is a real thing. In healthcare, sometimes it's we give great advice and direction to a lot of other people, and we don't always do a great job of following that. And I also recognize that my ambivalence about that was I did not want to be separated from my children.
Yeah. Yeah. Deep down, for sure.
Yeah, I didn't want to be separated from my kids. And, that helped me understand sort of phenomenologically the things that I was seeing around and in my community, and why people weren't seeking help earlier, right?
Right.
Like if they had kids, I understood that. I lived that. I understood it. So I go and I walk in, and I'm thinking, oh, they're just going to check me out and give me a little
give
bit
you a pill.
Yeah, give me a pill or shot of oxygen. Go home now. Finish those dishes.
Yeah. What's for dessert?
Exactly. And they admit me, and I'm like, oh my God. And I have this moment, and I think, okay, well, they admit me, and I'm like, okay, and even then, I didn't even have this sense like, oh, this is really serious. Like I had, it took, a lot of, I don't know, I'm thick-headed, I guess, in a lot of ways.
It was serious once your butt was hanging out of that.
That gown.
The gown.
Yeah.
That's when it got serious, right?
Yeah. I was like, and I was, I didn't realize this, but like when I got to the hospital, they made me put the gown on, and I got dressed, and then I was able to get out of and I went to the bathroom. There was a moment where I was able to see myself in that mirror, and I was like, I had lost a lot of weight because I had stopped. Remember, I said I stopped eating for like
because it tasted 4
or 5 days before it was just like, so I was trying to drink smoothies, and then I lost interest in that, and so there was about 4 or 5 days where I was just not eating. And if I was eating, I wasn't eating a whole lot.
And that can't help your immune system if you're not energizing your body with food.
So then they come in and they put me on oxygen.
And scary.
Yeah.
That's scary right there.
Yeah. And they're like, okay. The guy comes in, the doctor talks to me, and he's basically saying, we're gonna do this, and why don't you sleep on your stomach because it's better for your lungs to be on your stomach.
God.
Right? And that was challenging.
Yeah.
Because, and then they would be like, and even better if you raise your feet and so then it was kind of like, so the fluid in your lungs could sort of alleviate the pressure for you to breathe. And I was like, so I did that, and then they're like, okay, we're going to try this, and we're going to see about how things go in the morning. And if you're not better or if you get worse, we'll probably put you on a ventilator. And I remembered that experience and just thinking, I had that moment where I was like, okay, I'm clearly not getting out of here. And number 2, nobody can come in. And number 3, this is pretty serious. It hadn't hit me how serious it was until that moment when they're talking about putting me on a ventilator if it didn't get better.
And I just remembered that people were visiting people through windows. I forgot all about that.
Yeah.
That people couldn't come in and visit you.
They couldn't come in. I didn't have an iPad. I didn't have any way for people to visit me. And I did, on my second day there, I had that moment where I was like, oh my God, it's hard. I remember clearly thinking okay, there's a good chance that I won't see my children again. Yeah, and you go through all the things in your head, okay, I didn't make a will, I didn't prepare, I didn't tell people what to do, and so I'm panicking inside, and that was tough. That was really tough time.
Yeah.
And I called my sister the next afternoon, and I said, I left in such a hurry because you're badgering me to go to the hospital. I left in such a hurry. It took me 6 whole hours to go.
and I had to do the dishes.
I had all these things.
Make the beds.
And I said, but one of the things I forgot to do was bring medicine. I didn't bring any medicine with me. I said, can you bring me, I said, in these hospital, the wind in my hospital gown is cold, and and I had this moment where it was also so I asked for a blanket and I asked for medicine. I said, can you just bring or drop off? They won't let you come in, but you can drop it off downstairs. The nurse said that you can drop off something and they'll go get it for me. Mm-hmm. And they just leave me a shell and some of the medicines so I can pray. And then she did that, and they brought it up, and I remember the night of my second day, I hadn't gotten better. I hadn't gotten worse, but I hadn't necessarily gotten better, and they started me on the experimental drugs that morning. Oh. And so I called my other sister, Renee, who is the elder who works in our clinic. Actually, she's a spiritual care advisor and she's a traditional healer. And I talked to her and she said, put the medicines. She goes, you don't have to light them, just hold them. She goes, they have medicinal qualities whether you're lit or not, because they wouldn't let me light anything, right?
Right.
COVID unit. And if you remember back then, they had turned down the ventilation systems inside hospitals and stuff like that to keep it from moving through.
Yeah.
So I couldn't light this again.
Plus the oxygen.
Yeah. And so then I was like holding the medicine on my lap, and she said, just pray to that spirit of COVID. She goes, it's a spirit just like anything else. Pray to that spirit of COVID. Thank it for visiting you. Thank it for bringing you the lesson that you need to learn from this, whatever that is. And ask it to leave.
Yeah.
And she goes, and just pray for strength and resilience from your ancestors, because they're there with you in that room. And so I did that, held the medicines, I prayed, and I didn't know what to say in the prayer. I just said a simple prayer. And I just said, Creator, please help me. I'm not done here.
Yeah.
I'm not done. And the third day I started to get better. I started to slowly get better.
Yeah. I know, I remember too when you were talking about medicines, it was like, in all seriousness, the first time I made flat cedar tea, because people were saying, check it out, and it didn't give me permission to go out in public, but it gave me protection.
Yeah. So that was life defining and changing for sure. And by the fifth day, I think I was out of the woods. The medicine was starting to take place, or take a good turn. I asked for that stuff that the doctor was like, I was like, hey, I want whatever that guy in orange is getting. That don't just give me the remdesivir. Give me that really good stuff. And they're like, well, I don't know if I can get that, but at least I spent Thanksgiving there. I lost some time with my family, but I was able to get out on, I think, December 1st.
Yeah. Well, hey, Dr. Stately, thank you for that. We're going to take a quick break again, and we're going to have a special guest on that I'd like you to talk to a little bit, and then we'll get back to the story and also talk a little bit about vaccines and what vaccines are happening now, too. You're listening to Native Roots Radio presents Rising from COVID-19, another story of resilience. And this is a series of 3 shows, and this is show number 1. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Native Roots Radio presents Rising from COVID-19, another story of resilience. I'm here with Dr. Stately Haley, and Dr. Stately, we have a guest with us now, and I'd like you to take over the show, as you probably have wanted to since the very beginning, but go ahead, Dr. Stately.
Yeah, he figured out my dastardly plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We have a special guest, a very special guest. And I'm going to let her introduce herself first. And, but I will say her name, and then she's going to introduce herself. So we have a very special guest, Deanna StandingCloud, with us this evening to talk about her experiences living through and surviving and emerging from COVID. So, Deanna, why don't you tell our listeners who you are and where you come from, and a little bit about, what your life is like.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for inviting me on the show. This is maybe my second or third time being a a guest on the show. So Buju relatives in Dinaway Maganaduk. Gay Tibikwe Indigenous Kaz, Minawa Bagano Gijik Waba Makwe Indigo. Mikinak and Dudame, Oga Kaning and Dunjaba. My name is Deanna StandingCloud. I'm a citizen of the Red Lake Nation. I come from the place of abundant walleye, so that's how I introduce myself. I was born and raised in South Minneapolis. I currently live in Mounds View, Minnesota, and I have done work, a lot of collaborative work in the community since probably 2000. I mean, I grew up in the community, but I took a lot of initiative with my children's education. So I was kind of involved with Indian Ed, and just from there, I just was very collaborative with my community, and really advancing the standard of living for our community. So that has always been my drive. It's kind of evolved since I started my vision and things, and learning a lot of the spiritual practices and ceremonial practices and cultural practices. So I think that happens as you age, and I'm trying to age in a graceful way, just by also being aware of like my limitations, and then also thinking about mentoring younger folks as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, I remember years ago you were on Native Roots Radio, and it was you had one of the first really emotional introductions I've ever heard on my show, and you spoke in your language and you introduced everybody, including your family, and I thank you for that. I'll never forget that.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah.
I get emotional.
Yeah. It's impressive that you know your language.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. I love to hear you speak it, and I love hearing the language. So thank you for that, miigwech. And you have this amazing career now, as being like, you're this. I don't know. You're this super mom. You have these amazing kids. Who are nothing like my kids. So.
Here, ditto. No, mine are amazing. Never mind. But also a Native American MC powwows.
Yeah,
and I saw you in action this last weekend, and that's huge.
Yeah, like the Powwow for Hope, right? For American Indian Cancer Foundation. What is it? Their 15th powwow? 20th?
I think it was the 12th, but they
12th.
took 3 or 4 years off because of COVID. I think this was the first comeback.
Yeah.
After quite a few years.
Yeah. So that is an experience, right? It's a post-COVID experience that you can talk a little bit about. But and then also you're a stand-up comedian. You're a writer. I remember you wrote a play that I was mildly featured in for a very short period of time.
You're a thespian too, Dr. Stately?
Hold it now. Don't be calling each other, don't be calling people names on it. This is a family show. But yes, I'm a part-time thespian.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
On the weekends.
Only between the hours of 8 and 10.
Hey, here's my card. Here's my QR code.
Scan it.
Here's my Cash App.
But you have all these things, and you, for a period of time, you were the community liaison for United Health Group, right? And she was at our NACS big event last year as a our MC for our event that we did for our big 20th anniversary. We had a dinner at Wami, and I know you're salty.
I'm still salty I wasn't invited to that, but thank you for the Tupperware, Deanna. I just want to throw that out there.
You probably got lost in the mail in your invitation. I'm so sorry. That was a big impact of COVID too, like poor mail systems. So, but so you did that, and you have this amazing, like, I think. So the conversation tonight is about like our experiences around COVID and going through that experience. Some of it wasn't always pleasant. Some of it was really scary and challenging at times. And then we emerged, and we're on this other side of this, I like to tell people we're not out of the pandemic. The virus is still around. It's mutating all of the time.
Right.
I have a couple of relatives now who are who have COVID, and one who's very ill. And but we emerged from that, and I just have to say, it feels to me like I watch you move through the community. I've known you since you were a little girl, because I was friends with your mother and your father and a lot of the people. Sort of, your mother and I went to high school together. We kind of all sort of grew up together and became, somewhat of adults together.
It's all out to debate.
And exactly.
For debate.
What it really impresses me about you is that you're like, you are the embodiment of resilience. You like constantly remaking yourself, bouncing back, sort of like, and it's just, I think for me, it's just an amazing quality about you. And I don't know if you know that about yourself, but it's really something I've seen and witnessed over the last several years, like how just amazingly resilient you are. So a couple things I have is like questions I have is, one is like, tell us a little bit about your experience with COVID and surviving that, and tell us a little bit about where that resilience comes from.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm not gonna, you know what? I proclaimed at the Powell for Hope because there was a moment there where they had the luminary bags. So you have the option to purchase a luminary bag. So Powell for Hope is a fundraiser with the American Indian Cancer Foundation. And you can purchase a luminary bag, and you could, like put in memory of someone who has passed away from cancer. And, I knew about the feature at the powwow before, and I wasn't sure how it was going to play out, but this weekend, I was reading the names, and I just started to process kind of a lot of the losses that I've had over the past year and a half with my community, because I feel like I've been keeping busy a lot in order just to survive. I think just to keep really busy, because our minds are so powerful and our emotions are very powerful, and you could very well get sucked under with all the negativity, or if I were to kind of get wrapped up in a lot of the negative things that my family has gone through, which does throw me off. I've actually missed a couple of grant application deadlines in the past 6 months because I'm not blaming them. It's my own fault.
Oh.
But it's just like, it's heavy and it's hard to carry. So it was a very beautiful time to be processing those emotions with my community, because I don't like cry. I mean, I do cry once in a while, and it's so unlike me because I'm such a crybaby any other time. But after COVID, it's just like I'm not as much of a crier, if that makes sense. But and I appreciate you kind of wrapping up kind of how you see me and how you picture me, Dr. Stately, because you are, you're a hero. A lot of the movers and shakers in Indian country, and especially here in my community, are my heroes. And I see the cool things that everyone is doing. And I really appreciate those words. So and it's okay to be emotional. It's fine. I mean, it's 2023. If I feel like I'm going to shed a few tears, that is fine, because we're so over trying to hide our emotions, and I'm down with that movement. So, but yeah, what I actually gave birth to my third baby like weeks before the quarantine happened.
Wow.
And I didn't think I was going to actually even have, because I was 40, almost 41. I was 41 when she was born. So just weeks after that, we were quarantined. And at the time, I was experiencing a very abusive, like mentally abusive relationship. And so we were in a very small, um, it wasn't a studio apartment, but it was very small. Um, so it was really traumatic to kind of distance myself from that situation, especially with my kids experiencing a lot of the stuff along with me. And there was an interaction with my mother and this person, and I have a lot of regrets about that. Um, so there was a lot of huge, like transformative events that took place for me personally in during COVID. And I know that like holds true for the state, for everyone, because this was such a huge, like never before seen in modern times this way. Um, but and then so I gave birth to my third baby, and I was kind of going through postpartum depression at the time of the quarantine. So I was trying to make sense of that. A lot of what helped me to kind of survive and hold on to was my tobacco. Like that's very simple, like my tobacco, and remembering what it feels like to be in ceremony, and remembering how safe you feel in ceremony, and knowing that this doesn't feel good to me, this doesn't feel good to my kids, um, and this is not right. So November 2021, I at like 4 a.m, I some my son was assaulted by this person in front of our family. And he's 15 now. He was just a little 13-year-old guy. And so we just left at 4 a.m. And the first person I just drove north. My daughter helped me through this thing. I just drove north because that's where my mom was. I didn't tell her about it. As soon as I got to like an Airbnb, and I called her and I told her where I was, and she was in White Earth, which was a little far from where I was. But she just dropped everything and she came to see me, and she was so excited because she knew the situation I was in, and she knew that I wanted, it was best for me to get out of that. So she came to see me at the Airbnb, and we spent weeks together cooking and hanging out and having fun. I was processing a lot of trauma at the time too, though. So it was amazing. It was awesome. And it was a lot of the stuff that she had asked to do before that time. And I just kind of blew her off. And then she actually I got COVID in January of 2022, which it just threw me it was really, it was hard. And anybody who's experienced and had COVID kind of knows how heavy it hits your body. And then about a week after that, my mom got COVID, and she was asking me like different remedies, because I had my remedies all, spread out. I was just trying to combat it with a lot of our traditional medicines and things like that. And then went to Walgreens and stocked up. Well, I didn't actually go to Walgreens. Instacart or whoever. I love Instacart. And then she got COVID, and she wasn't vaccinated. She was she wasn't vocal about her, about her position on vaccinations to me, but she didn't get vaccinated, and she was intentional about not getting vaccinated. She didn't believe that it was something that she should do. She didn't trust it. And she had COVID before, but for some reason that bout of COVID really hit her hard, and she was admitted into the hospital. And then she just got worse. And then during COVID, it was such a hard thing because in the the policies and procedures and protocols in the hospital, I was the only one allowed to go visit her, which well, at one point she was in a hospital where it was like one person at a time per day, which was okay. But then we moved her to the cities where it was just one person and that was it. That I think that was one of the hardest things for me too, because she was, she was on life support and on oxygen, and I was there by myself with her, and it was just hard to process because when we're natives and we think of family around us when that's happening.
Yeah.
And I would get up and just try to take a break, and there was nobody to hug. There was like no one there, and it was one of the most difficult moments of my life, and it was weeks. I had to do that. And I kind of took the lead from my grandmother, but I was like the next of kin, and I was like in charge of all her decisions and things like that. So my grandma wanted me to like extend her, the life support and things like that. But she was just declining, and we just had to make the decision to take her off the life support. And so she passed away in a day after my daughter turned 2 in Maplewood, Minnesota, right up the road. And that when I thought about that happening as a young kid, like if I pictured something like that happening, I felt like I would just die and just go not make it. But in that moment, I knew I had to do it for my mom. I knew I had to do it for my grandma. I knew I had to do it for my kids. So I just took control of everything, and she was buried in the traditional Medewan way. So there's like very specific things that I had to do for her. So I actually got a doc, like a document, Google Doc with everything that I needed to do. And I had so much support because my mom had so many friends, like, Dr. Stately, how, like, she's my mom. So it's like, you imagine me, like, so she had tons of friends.
Yeah.
I had lots of support. But that was I just like engulfed myself in the traditional part of it, and like the meaning and because the person who conducts the ceremony explains to us, not everyone will do it, but he'll do it in the language, and then he'll do it in English. And not everybody does that, but he took the time to explain it to us. And it was beautiful. Like the explanation of where she goes and what happens and her travel was extremely beautiful. So I was actually proud of myself, and I could feel that my mom was super proud of me too. So I think my kids, my family, the culture, the language, all those things is the glue that kind of held me together, because if I didn't have those things, I probably would have lost it. So did I say that all in one breath? I'll take a little break right there.
Yeah. No, but that was a beautiful story, and
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for sharing that.
Amazing.
It's a beautiful story, and so moving. I mean, I knew your mother well. I knew her for most of my life. We were teenagers, I think, when we met. So, and when she passed, I was very sad. I'm very saddened, because I don't have a memory of being with Carmen where I wasn't laughing. So, like with my whole being, right? Like she just was like. It's easy to see it's easy for me to see where you get your beautiful spirit and your energy from, and also your sense of humor. And she also was deeply, deeply committed to her family, right? And like she understood that. And I know you also recently lost your grandma. Val, and I know I have vague memories of her because like I'm old, so I think I probably maybe one of the last times I saw her probably was when I was much younger. But I just remember that she was this very deeply spiritual and powerful Native woman too, Indigenous woman with strong values, and those are probably the things that where your mom got it and where you got it from, and that's for sure. So I just thank you for sharing that story with us. Yeah, like, and I had forgotten that you'd given birth to your baby. You were like a little baby girl, right at that moment in time, and I think right before COVID happened, and you were pregnant, and I saw you at the Indian Center. Like we were like kind of over. Like, this is before the Gatherings Cafe closed. Oh my God, that was like, I remember I had to go without
bison,
bison sweet potato, hash for like a whole year and a half. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to die without my hash. But I remember like seeing you in the Indian Center, and you were very pregnant. And I think, I was like, are you going to be able to give birth in a hospital? And it's just like, you and a number of other people, I think, felt that same anxiety, women that I knew that were pregnant during COVID. Like, am I going to be able to give birth? And will I be okay? And that must have been anxiety producing as well. So.
Yeah, well, that was, again, I'm using the word compelling story. And I don't know, we could probably maybe wrap it up here with this young warrior here, the young comedian warrior. Do you have any last?
I have more to say though, Robert. What the heck? I've been waiting for you.
Get you that quick.
What's cracking?
Hey.
No.
Yeah. Well,
I'll just have to come back.
Yeah, you have to come back. But yes, your daughter's beautiful. You're beautiful. Mama here is baby here. Does she still say that?
Oh, yeah.
We were in ceremony together, and they turned, and it got dark, and I think it was her first time being in a dark ceremony, right? And she was, I think she was a little scared, and and then Deanna was like, "It's okay, Mama's here," and then she said, "Baby here."
Oh.
Yeah, Mama here, baby here.
Like they were doing attendance and ceremony. How cute.
Taking roll.
Present.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a beautiful, that was a really beautiful ceremony too. I was like, I have a lot of great memories of that time. So
Yes, we got good memories together.
We do have a lot of really great memories together. I'm privileged. Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us and sharing with us your experience. I really appreciate that. And again, you are one of the stronger women I've ever met in my life. So tremendously proud of you, and proud to know you, and proud to call you daughter.
Oh, almost daughter.
Almost daughter.
We have a story.
We do have a story.
That'll be the next show.
I think we're going to keep that one under wraps.
That'll be your moonlighting as a whatever you're doing on the weekends.
Yeah, it could be like right as you're like going through all my things after I pass, you'll find the story and a little crumpled up note.
Some high heels. Like, what the heck?
Yes.
All right.
Could I just say, just like as a closing, like Native people, we had so many. This is something that we've always, in our history, we've survived many things. Worse than COVID, and we have that in our DNA. And I feel like COVID is just kind of our way of like you said, reinventing ourselves as a people. So it was our opportunity to kind of show who we really are and just kind of be more comfortable in our identity. So that resilience is really who we are at a molecular level. So COVID was very scary, but we, as Native people, we handled it like a boss.
Yes, we did. Thank you so much for reminding us of that.
Yes, Pinigi, thank you for coming on and speaking your truth. And I've always thought you were cool, and now I know you're even cooler, and I
Hey,
appreciate that, and appreciate
street
you.
cred.
Yeah,
Yes.
from Bobby P. That's
Yeah.
my street name, by the way.
Oh,
Nice.
Oh,
nice.
Wah, miigwech.
okay, we'll see you soon, Pinigi.
Great. Best to you and your
Guava
family.
man.
Go on, man.
Wow, amazing, Dr. Stately. We only have like a few minutes left here, and I kind of want to get into just a little bit of update on vaccines and what we can do. And I know COVID's back, and I know Haley's been looking up some statistics and things like that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's like that relative that
Why are you looking at me like that?
it's like that relative that you sort of kind of like, yeah, good to see you.
Yeah.
Come back in a couple of years,
Yeah.
and he keeps visiting. Yeah.
Well, you were saying earlier too that and I guess I don't want to get the blame thrower out, but it's still with us, and it's coming in different variances, and it's different times. It's more prevalent. Like summers we're outdoors, now we're back inside.
As the season's getting colder, we're going to start to stay back indoors more frequently, and that's going to be a significant challenge because we'll have the confluence of that, but we'll also have the confluence of the flu season, which is going to be, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to over the last like 3 or 4 weeks who thought like, oh, I just have allergies, or oh, I just have a cold. A relative of mine was like, well, I just have strep. I'm going to go get tested for strep because my throat is really sore, and I think I'm okay with that. And then like, well, you don't have strep, but you have COVID, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so part of it is an opportunity for us to remind people like, this is a serious situation. And like, so there's a bunch of things I think to keep at the front of our minds here as we sort of kind of go into this next wave of things. One is that this particular variant, I think they call it Eris. It's XB. I know every time I think about it, I think of that group, the song XBIX, XBIC or something like that.
Oh, I thought
But
it was 86
yeah.
7530999. No.
Exactly. Yeah. The thought here is like that is a very virulent strain. I guess it's very easy to pass, and lots of discussion, robust discussion, I think, in lots of spaces about whether or not it is helpful to wear masks or not. I hear people inside healthcare, outside healthcare, in the stores, out on the streets, in the parking lots about whether or not it's effective to wear masks. I think there's a number of things that are important. One is like, think about the people around you. Do you have people that live with you who are vulnerable to becoming very sick? Do they have, immune compromised situations? Are they elderly? Do they have situations in which they did get sick? They would get very ill. Even if they've had it before, like we have this perception as human beings to think like, oh, okay, I got it before and it wasn't all that bad. I just, and then, and that's the nature of a variant though, as the virus gets stronger and gets, and mutates, it can get more stronger and more powerful, and it can affect you in different ways. So be thoughtful, be a good relative, wear masks indoors if you're around people who are more vulnerable. Think of other people who, need your protection. Think about your role in your life. Like my lesson in this is I'm a dad and I have kids I'm still raising, so I have to take a little bit more responsibility here. And so I think show up and be a good relative and think of yourself and your well-being and the impact that has on other people and their well-being. And there's lots of different ways you can do that. Get a vaccine.
Yeah.
Updated vaccines are available as of this week.
Really?
Yes, and and free COVID tests now. You can still get those, and as long as they're available. So use the tools that we have to be able to sort of protect the people we love. You don't even protect some people that you don't love necessarily because they do have value.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. I said that with my fingers crossed, though.
Oh,
but
okay. I saw that.
yeah. Well, Dr. Stately, we're wrapping it up here. We got about 3 more minutes left, and I just want to thank you and thank our guest tonight with these stories of remembrance of people that are in our life, but also of what we've gone through, and it really makes sense. You did name the show Rising from COVID-19, Another Story of Resilience. I won't admit that in a court, but you did name the story, and that's true. That what you spoke tonight and what our young warriors she spoke about too.
Yeah. I loved her message.
Yeah.
That we are resilient people and we emerge stronger from this.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Exactly. Well, Haley, do you have any last comments here before we take off? It's pretty intense today.
Yeah, I think it's a great reminder to talk about this pandemic and how it's affected all of us, and to remember the people that we've lost close to us and near and dear to us. And I hope everyone takes care of themselves and is a good relative and takes care of their family and does so by getting vaxxed or getting boosted and washing your hands and doing all the things that we do to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, and I appreciate it too. And I think, we're going to take off here, and this is going to be a series of a couple more events that Dr. Stately will be co-hosting with us. And we just wanted to remind everybody what happened, and what it's like, and what it's like now. And I did steal that from my big book, but
From Bob.
Dr. Bob. Hey, again, thank you, Dr. Stately, Deanna. Thank you so much, Haley.
Thank you to the Minnesota Department of Health for supporting this.
Yeah, good one. And we'll see you soon. And you'll hear Dr. Stately every Monday on Native Roots Radio, and we're awake and for more updates. And we'll be on soon again with another, what we like to call a sacred symposium, and that's a tongue twister. It's hard to say. Try it once.
3 times. Sacred Symposium, Sacred Symposium, Sacred Symposium.
Here we go.
Hey, 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 hey,